the last thing I'll say before I share my screen is don't sit on your glasses during COVID. So if anybody's an ordered person that's fixated on the fact that my glasses are crooked, I'm sorry. I have learned how that you can buy glasses online and they're on their way. I'm going to share my screen with you now, and we'll get into the content of today's conversation. I want to acknowledge another acknowledgement as we start that if you're on this webinar, then you've probably already done a lot of work to develop a really strong, vibrant culture in your organisation. So we're not here to do a one-on-one on organisational culture. What we're here to do is talk about how do you leverage the hard work you've already done? How do you protect that hard work over what's ahead of us beyond what we call the C word? And I've said I'll give you at least 20 ideas that you can use now and how to do them. One of the things I'd really love your feedback on at the end is I've been researching and been to a lot of webinars where we talk about sharing information on how to do things, but I made the comment to Kath the other day, I want to make sure that we don't just tell people to do things, but we tell them how to do things. And there's a big difference, because particularly anybody who's not been through anything like this before, which is pretty much all of us, sometimes it really helps if people just give us the simple words and the language and the how-tos to fill that gap between taking something from today and using it in your business tomorrow. So I'll do my best to achieve that. To that end, we all know webinars can be exhausting, they can be boring, they can take a long time. I'm not going to step you through the classic agenda introduction and my background. I'm happy to share all of that later. I'm just going to jump straight into where are we at now. So COVID hits, and along comes my feeling that we need to have a bit of a look at our old friend Maslow. Now, Mr. Maslow back in 1946 invented or theorized this diagram that you're looking at now, which is known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you would have seen this plenty of times. For some of you, it's new, so I'm just going to step through it pretty simply in the context of where we're at. Maslow argued that to understand human motivation, we needed to understand what motivates humans and at what level. So at a very basic level, he argued that if we don't have air, food, water, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, all the things in that bottom red row there, if we don't have those, we're not going to be able to think about anything else but them. We're going to be motivated wholly and solely to get our next meal, our next breath, somewhere to sleep, shelter from the storms, and so on and so on. He argued that once those needs were more or less met, and he did change his argument over time, interestingly. This was quite a linear study at the beginning, but he shifted a bit, which I'll explain shortly. Once our basic physiological needs are met, next comes our safety needs. So I want security, I want employment, I want that employment to bring me resources or other ways of getting the resources that I need to comfortably survive. My health, really, really important one, and my home. Once those needs are met, we move up into those human connection, love and belonging needs, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. And beyond those into the blue and the green I'll talk about shortly. What is your dog's name, Kath? No, it's not Kath. Somebody else got a dog online.
Not yet. No, I think that's someone else. Not mine. I've popped my dog inside.
Okay.
While we're here, Jo.
Crazy.
Sure. And you know what? We're fine with the dog, everybody. Please don't worry. This is our real world now, and that's what we all need to respect and understand.
That's actually a great segue, Jo. We've had a question through, and that question is, how better can we understand the expectations shared between employers and employees on what it means to work from home? And I think that's, I've been musing on that one. We remember a few years ago when there was the chap with the child coming into the broadcast.
Yeah.
And you know, now we have the dog, and I think we've changed our expectations. But there's a question for you on how do we better understand those expectations between employers and employees in terms of what it means to work from home. So whether that's now or parked, and you'll come
Look,
to.
I think there's a bit of a theme that will follow through this, because it is really important, and what we're really talking to there is alignment. Understanding where each person is at and aligning, firstly understanding their individual expectations and what the differences are, and then finding some alignment or middle ground there. And what's probably, when keep an eye out, we are spending a couple of slides on human connection, and I'll give you some interesting thought starters around there, and also some actions on how to start some of those conversations. So I will circle back around that a couple of times as we go through. So jumping back into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll see these bottom warm colours. To the left of them, I've put an arrow that heads both ways. The reality for us is that most of us live most of the time these days with the predominantly some fixation or focus on our own self-esteem, our self-actualization, gaining respect, status recognition, playing to our strengths to achieve things, having the freedom to travel, to make decisions. And ultimately, the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that self-actualization. So most of us, most of the time, are able to be in that world. What COVID's done is ripped all of us back down into that space where we feel that our most basic human needs, and multiples of them for many people, are either not being met in actuality or are placed at risk. And so, as Maslow argued, while those things are at play, it's going to be very hard to motivate people to remain in that space of self-esteem, self-actualization, and the level of, to talk to the question that was just asked, the level of engagement that we might normally have expected from that person before this came along. So there's an enormous amount of stress that comes with that, that leads to it. And the other point I'll make there as well, from a broader community perspective, is that, you know, if my marriage breaks up, if I lose my job, my mum passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, and my world was upside down. And in my community, I was, you know, perhaps the one or one of the few people that was doing it really tough at that time. And the rest of my community therefore had the I guess the energy and the wherewithal to step in and provide me with support. Look to the bushfires earlier this year, and we really saw some amazing examples of communities that had all of those needs ripped away by bushfires, but so many others of us able to step in and provide as much support as we could. The challenge we've faced over the last few weeks is that it's all of us. So it's been harder to find the person who can lift you up or pick you up if you're really feeling that you're struggling with that space. So that's where we're at now. I want to share with you another study that I've been involved, or haven't been involved with the study, that's not true, but that I've come across. I'm doing a piece of work with the South Australian seafood industry at the moment, and some members of that industry did a big research piece into wellness in the seafood sector across Australia back in 2017. One of the drivers of that was the fact that mental health is a bigger issue in that industry. They have about double the suicide rate of the average population. In the mental health part of that survey, they were asked, about 1,000 people in that industry were asked, how much do the following factors contribute to stress amongst those in your fishery? Now, I've taken only the top 4 answers to what was a very long list of things that could potentially cause stress. And I just want to hone in, and this might not make sense, and I will explain why in a moment. I want to hone in on the top 3 there. The top equal things that cause very much or contribute very much to stress amongst the fishery for that industry are government red tape and uncertainty about future changes to government access regulations or government regulations. The third one that came in a close third behind those two was changes to government regulations. So what we see in this industry is that it's the uncertainty, or the uncertainty about future, has a bigger impact on the stress of the fishery than the actual changes to government regulations. And in fact, if we were to talk about those top 3, if you could remove some of that uncertainty, you might have a really positive impact on the stress levels within the fishery. Why has she used a seafood industry example? I've chosen to draw the comparison of that to society at the moment. The fishing industry is highly regulated. They're often family businesses. So one job goes and another job goes with it. They are impacted by government regulations enormously, and impacted by nature enormously. So some of their basic needs, human needs, rely incredibly on government regulation and forces of nature. And that's where we're at now. We are significantly impacted as human beings by changes to government regulations at a level we've never experienced previously. And of course, all of that relates back to this nature thing, which is the C word. So we're kind of moving a little bit beyond the real panic stage at the moment, which we're coming to. But I have been saying to people that in a normal culturalized world, when we're doing workshops around how to deal with change, we talk quite openly about controlling the controllables, that you can control your response to what happens to you, even though you can't control what happens. that language was a little raw at the beginning of this change for many people. So what I've talked about, and it can continue for those that are struggling, is if we can just distract ourselves from that uncertainty, if it's overwhelming us, the extent to which we can sometimes distract ourselves from that uncertainty will help us cope with some of the stress associated with what's going on for us in this world at the moment. Kath, did you have any questions before I jump into this next piece?
I do. I was about to jump in actually. So the succinct question is: does working from home increase the power of the employee? How do we find that common? It's an interesting one, isn't it? If we agree with the research that shows a distinct lack of commonality between person values and organisational values, it seems to the questioner, the two now mash up due to the new normal of working from home. Does it increase the power of the employee?
I think that, look, I think there's the short-term power and the long-term power. So certainly right now, as employees, we could argue in certain circumstances that we've got the choice to sit around and watch Netflix and not do our job. But I think also there's a really big picture here that for many organisations, the economic standpoint is that they are not going to be able to afford to keep their workforces on board. And so I'm advising my clients to, make sure that in their conversations, they're taking a very supportive and long-term focus. There was a client I was talking to the other day that said, I need to get an email out about the new rules, about how we're going to divide up the work that we've got because we haven't got as much work as we did have. And I said, be careful about the imposing of the rules as opposed to the playing to the emotion of the long-term picture for the business. We need you now. We need you to be on our side. We need you to be working for us so that we can survive and prosper with you as a part of that team in the long term. So again, we'll loop back around because there's some very direct material on this later in the presentation.
I think that's a really interesting point, Jo, and I think we are seeing that that hierarchy change. So you've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but also there's the organisational hierarchy, and I think that is changing. Perhaps it's becoming more of a circularity rather than a top-down.
And I think it's important to note, and I meant to say at the beginning, there are people on this webinar who are dealing with business slowdown, shutdown, and everything that goes with that and remote work. But there's also some people on this webinar that I know are working in industries that have ramped up, that are extremely busy at the moment. And so important to understand that we're talking to both groups because ultimately both of those things are significant and sudden change that our people are going through. So many of the symptoms will remain the same. So even in a workplace where you've got, things have gotten really busy, I'm sure Woolworths supermarkets aren't wanting to lose too many of their loyal employees at the moment who decide that they're going to, do what they want to do because they do have a lot of power at the moment. They, they don't want to lose their employees, so they want to, support them. So it's an interesting one. I'm going to jump in very quickly to this 4 stages. And again, it's a conversation starter with your team. So all throughout this, you can use these examples of things that you can do and say to your people to get conversations going. So 4 stages of what's happened with COVID for businesses. Firstly, it's like a storm. The storm hits. What do you need to do? And I'm going to go over this one pretty quickly because I'll be asking you in a poll in a minute to share where you think you're at. It's just like when a storm hits. Where is everybody? Are they safe? Tell people what you're going to do. Be transparent. The best leaders are being super transparent at the moment, talking to their teams often about the realities of what's going on. We need to have one-on-ones and we need to start talking, if we haven't already, about this thing called psychological safety. We need for our employees to feel like they can say what they want to say or share how they're feeling without fear of retribution. And that's for 2 reasons. 1, because it's good for business. But 2, if they don't feel that way, that added to all of the other stress and pressure of having, so many other things placed at risk will really have a negative impact on their mental wellness. And at this stage, we go back and remember the hierarchy of needs. Where have our people been put into by this storm that's just hit? The next thing we do, the house got flooded in the storm, some windows got smashed. We want to resolve our immediate human and company needs. We need to clean up. We needed to get people remotely working. We needed to hire new staff because we were getting busier. We needed to talk to our customers, or do need to talk to our customers about what's going on, and what we're going to do about it, and to keep doing that. I was asked by quite a number of larger clients right when this happened if I could prepare some webinars on mental wellness, and over half of them came back to me once we'd sort of stepped through what that might look like to say, this is great, but can we just hold for a moment, because we've realised that we can't go and talk to our people about wellness until we've solved those basic needs of, will we be able to pay them? Will we be able to give them the normal benefits that we do, and all of those types of things? Will we be able to plug their computers in at home? All of those basic things. During that cleanup, as leaders, we want to have frequent check-ins. We want to start talking about mental wellness, start talking about it early, start asking for feedback from your teams about how you can support them during that time, and likewise with customer communication. The next stage is planning. So we're now living with kind of a temporary new normal, and we need to start thinking now, and we're seeing a lot of it coming out in, you know, the type of reading that I do, is we need to establish what the new normal is going to look like. My advice here is, a lot of you will have established some temporary working rhythms, like daily Zoom chats, phone calls, one-on-ones, team meetings, and those types of things. At those meetings, start asking for people to share and think about what they reckon might work for the future. You know, there's all sorts of ideas out there. I've certainly pivoted my business significantly, and it looks very different now as a result of not being able to present to people facing in rooms. You may all tell me to go back after this, but that's all right. I'll keep going for a moment. Use the time, for those of you that have got a bit of downtime, use that time to try new tech. I know that I've been too busy to try some of the new collaboration tools, mind mapping tools online, and those types of things. So one I've recently tried is a program called Mural, because I used to do a lot of sticky note activities in my face-to-face training sessions. Really powerful whiteboard online type tool. I was only this morning introduced to a tool called Monday, which is a collaborative, almost project management software. And I just looked at it and went, wow, this makes life so much easier. And team too as well. I had a client the other day asking me for HR advice ultimately about what to do with team members that wouldn't have enough work to do to fill up their $1,500 JobKeeper bucket, but didn't want them sitting idle. And one of the ideas that we came to was, get them writing blogs about what they do, get them researching some of this tech, get them thinking about how they can improve the business. You might be amazed about what comes back to you. I've written the word growth mindset in there. Another tip for anybody who hasn't come across her work, the work of Carol Dweck on growth mindset. Growth mindset is not all about thinking about growth and being positive and all of that sort of thing, whilst there's an element of that. The key message I took away from my reading of growth mindset sat around always looking for different ways of getting information and getting contributions to decisions being made. So have a read of that book, or the summary of that book. It's got some really great tips about going and asking people outside your normal circle for advice and ideas on how we move forward. And then finally, we're building. We will need new policies. We will need new processes. We will change the way that we work. Some of us may even reduce the office space we take up. And again, those businesses that are busier may open new markets, may change the way that they staff and the product offerings that they have. We will need, therefore, to change role descriptions. We will need to rework our strategies. Encourage your teams to talk about what are we going to keep and what are we going to leave behind us, and what are our new working rhythms going to look like. And all of that can come together in this tool that we call a culture map. And we don't have time to go into that in a great deal of detail today, but I'm very happy to send anybody a copy of a template, which really will enable you to have a starting point that's pretty quick to put together, where you and your team at or towards the end of this map out on one page the new how we do things around here in our organisation. So we've gone through a lot of information about stages and levels, and I'm going to hit you with one more, and I make no apology for it if it's a little full on and confusing. That's because the reality is that that's where we're at now, and each of you will take a little something from this. I just forgot to do my poll, Kath, so I will perhaps do it. How about that? Let me open a poll for you and give you a short break from my voice. I'm going to launch a poll that just asks each of you which stage of the change, of the COVID change, you think your business is at. So that poll is now open. I'm hoping people can see it. Somebody can see it?
I can see it. Can others see it?
Yep.
If you can't see it, pop something in the chat, and we'll fix that. Okay, Matthew can see it. Marika can see it. So I think we're live. Are you having some answers come through?
Yep.
There was a question, and I know you'll be getting to this in just a moment, Jo, but to go through a little bit more in fuller detail, going down the wellness road with your with your team. I think that's about to come up in some slides.
Yeah, look,
just around the corner.
It absolutely is, and there's plenty of data that tells us that high levels of stress in organisations lead to low levels of engagement. Low levels of engagement have significant impacts on productivity and therefore profit. And equally, plenty of evidence that says, you know, for every $1 you invest in employee wellness, you get a minimum of about $3 in return. Depending which study you look at, you can get up to 12 in return. So, you know, read the right study and you'll get better growth potentially. So just looking... and yes, I'm getting into some really practical tools around that. So we've basically got 13% of people in cleanup. Everybody seems to be through the storm now. 63% planning for next, and 25% building the future, which is fantastic to hear. So thanks everybody for giving me that information. It's you know, it probably does sit around what I would have thought. So moving on now to probably the last of our, you know, stages of where we're at. Little activity that you can do with your team, which can be really helpful culture-wise, and particularly now as you're starting to plan for the future. Those of you that are in that 63% of starting to plan, this would be a really cool activity to do online. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed the change curve. You may have heard of the stages of grief, the 5 stages of grief. She was also the author of that. People go through these stages. They don't always go through all of them. They don't always go through them in order, but you can see from the wave here that over time we go through roughly these stages in terms of coming to terms with and implementing change. And at each stage, we have different levels of morale and confidence impacts. So shock, denial, frustration, depression, experiment, decision, and integration. Shock and denial, for example, a classic one. I think there's plenty of people during COVID that did that. My poor long-suffering partner, Marty, I think was one of them, and he'll kill me for telling you, but there was a Monday not so long ago that the first thing he said to me in the morning was something along the lines of, stuff's getting real, I'm going to have to make some decisions, aren't I? And he then proceeded, this was quite funny, he proceeded to say, if you're out and about today, Jo, do you reckon you could stop in and see if you can get me some hand sanitizer? And that was 3 weeks into panic buying. So definitely somebody removing from denial into shock in that order at that stage. If we look at the 4 stages I've just talked about though, shock and denial really sit in the storm phase. Frustration and depression sit in the cleanup. You know, I've got to live with this. This is really happening. It's really impacted me. Gets you really, really down. We then start to move up. So the experimentation's interesting because we just had to go and work remotely from home. Now we're starting to think about how do we experiment with that as maybe something that's a bit of a longer term proposition. How do we experiment that in line with Penny's question around, you know, who's got the balance of power and how do we keep that in balance, and how do we, you know, do this in a way that can actually come out maybe better for everybody at the other end. And then decision making and integration sit across those last 2 stages. So one of the things that I used to do back in face-to-face days was put some big dots across the floor of the training room, for example, with those words on each of them, and ask people to go and stand at the stage of change they feel they're at with whatever the change is that's going on in the organisation. You could do this online quite easily yourselves by asking people to share where they're at or to reflect on where they're at on that change curve. And then what we did was people who were at opposite ends, people who were at different stages, put them together and just ask them to have a conversation about where they're at. So you may have some people that are still in a really bad place around this, pop them together in a Zoom room. If anybody wants to know how to do that, it's very easy. And get them to have a talk about it. And what happens ultimately is those who are in the better place, heading up on the confidence and comfort curve, will gain greater understanding of those who are not, and possibly give them some positives to reflect upon to bring them along the journey. So by getting people to talk about it and share where they're at, you will find that you will build empathy, you'll build conversation and understanding in the organisation. And it's where it doesn't matter what stage you're at really, because everybody knows and accepts that we're in a change stage at the moment.
And of course, Jo, everyone is going to be at different personal points, aren't they? So we've seen all of these, Matt Wright Simon will relate. The introverts have been practicing for this for a while. The extroverts are not okay. Yeah. And so everyone will have their own person.
Socially distanced with the neighbours. So yeah, absolutely. And so opening up that conversation is a really powerful thing.
So there is, can I just jump in? There is a question that's really topical, and it's what about those staff that you know had mental issues before COVID happened?
Yeah, absolutely. The advice is probably not terribly different to what it was that before, and my advice there would be to try to ensure that the conversation is at the right level of openness. Certainly to accept and respect that productivity might be a challenge for you right now. If it's an open conversation, it's good because you can point them in the right direction to get help and care and that type of thing. So, you know, very much case by case, and very much understanding that the higher the levels of stress, it's because of those fears and uncertainties around, you know, these basic human needs being at risk. So this will exacerbate. We know that there's talk about there being increased pressure on depression and anxiety services. I think Beyond Blue are reporting higher numbers. Police forces are certainly expecting spikes in domestic violence. So everything's going to be polarised, which is a word I'm going to touch on in a moment. The next tool I want to share, and again, it talks to this one, and I know there's a couple of people on this webinar that have used this tool, so you're just going to have to be patient, or feel free to drop a comment in. The Stairway of Stress is a model that I pulled together a number of years ago as a result of a lot of learning that I'd done in the stress management, wellness and resilience space. And what I really felt again was that we need to understand things practically. We need to kind of unpack, for want of a better word, this stress thing, because we all talk about I'm really stressed and then I need to relax or I need to deal with it. I wanted to create a tool that helped people understand where they were at in terms of stress and what they could do to reduce that level before it got too bad. A lot of the work that Culturise does in this mental wellness space sits in the early intervention space as opposed to waiting for it to get really bad. So we really want to kind of help at that stage. So very quickly, A5 card or A4 or poster. This first page is 2 pages. You'll see the second in a moment. This is what I'd call the diagnosis page. I look at this page a few times a day and go, where am I at right now? Particularly if I see or hear a trigger of some kind. Stress can be good. So we start by saying stress is like an old friend that's coming to visit. It's a good thing. The official name for good stress is eustress. So the analogy of an old friend visiting is, you know, I'm looking forward to it. I'm organised. I've got a deadline to meet. I might tidy the house or bake some cookies. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to hearing more about what's going on for them. They come, they visit. It's great. In a work context, the same feeling. I'm anticipating. I'm excited and aware. I've got a deadline to meet. I had a webinar to plan for this morning. It's good stress. I hope I go well. It's that butterfly feeling we get before a big race. Feeling challenged, sharp and ready. Unfortunately, stress, like your old friend, can overstay its welcome. So your friend overstays, you've had 2 cups of tea or a couple of wines or whatever it is, and you start to wonder, I wonder when they're going to leave. I had other things I needed to do today. I haven't topped the glass up. Surely he or she's getting the hint. You start to feel distracted, maybe a bit frustrated. I'm now starting to feel I'm not going to get everything done today that I want to get done. And in a work context, it's the same. That feeling of being distracted, frustrated. I'm feeling rushed and busy. I run a workshop called Kill Busy. often when we talk about being busy, it's because we're not feeling in an organized state with all the different priorities we've got going on, and we might be procrastinating, leaving things to the last minute. So when I'm feeling like that, I want to think about what I can do to get back up. Our old friend actually finally admits that they don't have somewhere to sleep tonight, and so they move in for a day or two, except a week or so later, they're still there. I'm now, as their host, feeling like I can't keep to my good habits because I've got to look after this friend. I'm missing deadlines left, right and centre. I'm overwhelmed. There's too much going on. I'm getting annoyed with my partner. It's not really his fault. It's because I've got this guest overstaying, and I might start avoiding that person or others or tasks. I'm just generally not in a good space. That's where what stress does to us as well. We might be starting to lose our good habits, missing deadlines, feeling somewhat overwhelmed sometimes, snappy or highly annoyed, or, as I said, avoiding people and things. So what can we do to lift up from there? And then as we go down, stress taking over, we're losing sleep, falling into negative patterns. You can read the words on here. We're really starting to change, and we can get to the point where our old friend has now moved in and is ruling our house, if not directly, from the back shadows. And that's having a significant impact on our life. We're having health problems. Very important, particularly during this uncertain time of COVID, to understand that for many of the people that are suffering the greatest anxiety and stress about the uncertainty of the future, the chemical, and we don't have time to go into detail today, but the chemical impact of stress is such that your body changes, it effectively slows down non-essential systems in order to fuel the nervous system to respond to the stress. So when you hear people saying that they might get sick, or the doctor said you need to find ways to relax because you're having trouble getting pregnant, people who are stressed having digestive problems, that's actually real, because constant stress slows down our immune, reproductive and digestive systems. So some of the people who are feeling the most stress through this period and do generally are also the ones that are, you know, putting themselves more at risk in doing so and perhaps don't have control over it.
So that really comes back to that question before about existing or pre-existing mental health. And I'm just going to pull up, Matthew Wright Simon has renamed your model, and he's called it the Stairway to Hell. And he says it's excellent, and it is excellent. And I shared with Joe earlier that I've actually got an inspiration wall in the smallest room of my house. You can probably guess which one that one is. So I actually have both of these in that smallest room in my house, and I look at them often, and it's just my way of embedding that.
She's not talking about the pantry, people.
It's not the pantry.
That's all I'll say. So, as I said, I keep one of these, not in my bathroom, but on my desk. I might change that for days ahead. And I'll look at it from time to time. And where it gets really useful then is when you flip it over, because this is the action plan. So if I see myself as having stress settling in at the moment, then it is time to distract myself from it. Play a board game, go and connect with somebody, maybe not typing online. And you can see this was produced pre-COVID. I haven't changed it. Human connection is a bit tougher right now and that type of thing. I often find people dwelling us down the bottom here where it's ruling and taking over. And I make no apology for saying to people on this webinar and beyond, remember that if it's really impacting you, it's just like any other illness. You may not be able to fix it yourself. So please get help, encourage others to get help. One of the things that I've also been saying is that when people around you are starting to talk, you know, even tongue in cheek, a bit doomsday-ish about this, just check in with them and make sure that they really are joking. Ask them if they're okay, because they might not be. The space that we traditionally and organisations play in the most, particularly in a team format. So say you download and print some of these again to share with your teams on Zoom chats, is in that kind of visiting, overstaying and settling in phase where you can develop team language and actions around what you do when you're feeling stress has got you at a particular level. The two at the top of overstaying are the only two that I'll dwell on in any great depth while we're on this slide, because they're just used so much by clients of mine. We talk about coming in the morning and writing a list of the top 3 things that I need to get done today. During COVID particular, that 3 things might not be all work things. You might need to have something really important personally ticked off of that list so that you can even focus on your work. But what are the 3 most important things for you to get done at work today? The other one we talk about is the dread job. So what's the thing that you've been putting off that you don't want to do? And I ask people, you know, when you do get that dread job done, does it take as long as you thought it was going to take? Was it as painful as you thought it was going to be? And importantly, how do you feel once you get it done? One of the challenges with de-stressing is that it's not measurable. It's not like taking off your glasses and it's gone. You don't feel it that immediately necessarily, or acknowledge the feeling all the time. So we want to just keep lifting bits and pieces of it as we can. So the dread jobs are really a really useful one. I often quiz people on where they're at on this scale, and some people really are in visiting. And you might swing up and down this scale numerous times a day. So it's not meant to be some permanent diagnosis of where you're at. It's meant to be a tool for action and conversation to keep yourself from slipping further down. So when stress is just visiting, when you're feeling good, use that time well. Focus on something that really matters to you that you can get something out of. Define where you're at, make some plans, but also pace yourself and engage others. So, you know, I spent so much energy pivoting this little business of Culturise in the first 3 weeks that at Easter, I absolutely hit a wall. Down to taking over I went because I had just overdone the visiting piece, the energy and everything that came behind having to pivot a business. So do pace yourself when you're feeling that really positive energy.
What did you do then, Jo?
Pardon?
Over Easter, what did you do?
Luckily, it happened on a weekend, so I went into the fetal position and had a good cry a couple of times. But I have a mantra that, my dear partner taught me, and it was, 1 foot in front of the other. And so I did everything that was, in that space. I made sure that I didn't go back onto my computer that weekend. I made sure that I walked outside at length every single day. And I cooked. I did a lot of cooking because that's good therapy for me. They call me the short order cook. A lot of cooking, a lot of heads in this house, not necessarily that good a quality, but there's a lot of food that comes out of the kitchen.